Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, powered by FanDuel Sportsbook. It's a joining of forces on today's show, a little college football national championship, the culmination of the NFL regular season. I'm your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. But before we kick things off on today's show, I want to encourage all of you, our loyal listeners. FanDuel has some great promotions available for you just in time for the crowning of a college football national champion. 30-1 enhanced odds for all new users, regardless of if you're backing Alabama or Georgia on the money line. One of the best promotions you're going to find out there. You can't beat 30-1. FanDuel.com. Use the promo code BetTheBoard. And Payne, it's bittersweet, obviously.
Saban, a Heisman quarterback, and I get 30-1.
Hey, you know, you may want to try and take advantage of Georgia on the money line at 30-1. You may want to back Alabama. I mean, the world is your oyster at FanDuel just in time for Monday's national championship. But I want to ask you, before we get to some of the big games that we're planning to break down, are you okay with the melding of worlds here? We have college football and we have the NFL end of the regular season. I mean, normally this would be wild card weekend and we would have those two forces combined.
I got to tell you, there was some guy that was a part of Bet the Board that came up with this idea. He's brilliant. I have no idea who he was, but good idea nonetheless.
Oh, I thought you were going to pat yourself on the back, or I wasn't sure where you were going with this. I thought maybe you were going to give listeners plaudits and say
no, this was my idea. No, this is my idea. I'm actually looking forward to the national championship game far more than I am any game on the NFL.
Oh, we're breaking. Oh, hold on a second. I'm marking this down. What's the date today? It's January 6th. 2022, and we've made Bet the Board.
Hashtag New Year, New Me. I think that's what the kids are saying.
And I believe so as well, but I'm anxiously awaiting your Instagram post. You know, New Year, old me, New Year, same year, whatever the hell it's called. But yes, a little college football, a little NFL. Obviously, the NFL slate, we're going to try and deal in known commodities instead of the guesswork and speculation that seems to predominate this week. But you want to kick things off in college? I know the game's not till Monday, but I feel like this will be a more in-depth breakdown than what we're going to get anywhere else.
Yes, let's start with Georgia, Alabama, but all games will be timestamped, so if you want to wait to listen to this until Monday, you can do that. I don't see a situation where the line's going to move too much from now until then. So if you want to just fast forward to the NFL games, they will be timestamped.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. I don't see this taking the shape or form of a college football first half total where you better listen as soon as the podcast goes live, where that number will not be widely available. A little bit of a different dynamic in play here for a game at Lucas Oil Stadium where it's the Georgia Bulldogs, now a 3-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook, total in the game at 52. The first time these two teams met, of course, in the SEC Championship, where Alabama closed as a 6-point underdog. It ended a streak of 92 straight games where Alabama closed as a favorite. The previous instance of that happening was back on October 3rd, 2015, where Alabama was a 1-point pup against Georgia. It actually was the longest streak in college football, going all the way back to 1978. This will also be the first time Nick Saban enters the BCS, or College Football Playoff Championship, as a dog since 2003, when he was the head coach at LSU, a game that LSU was able to take home the crystal ball or whatever the hell they were handing out. And when you look at Alabama, Payne, 1-4 against the number in college football playoff title games. They did cover last year as a 9.5 point favorite against Ohio State. The total has come in over as well in 5 out of the last 6, 5-0-1 to be precise. And that push actually came last year against Ohio State, but if you got the best of the number, you were able to cash there as well. I bring up all of that to ask you this question, Payne. I have to imagine there are a lot of folks out there that are handicapping this game going, you know what, we've seen this football contest take place before. I get the better head coach, I get the better starting quarterback, and this is going to be the perfect time for me to take a full field goal with Alabama.
Easy peasy. The 9-second handicap. Better coach, better quarterback, and I get points. Let's get the hell out of Dodge.
Something tells me you and I do not believe the game will be that simple and that straightforward. And if things go the way Georgia fans hope they do, and they can bring their first national championship to Athens since 1980, you may be taking applications for the Stetson Bennett fan club from now until 2026.
So, listen, it could be that easy. Right? I mean, Alabama could easily go out there and win this game. They might have Kirby Smart and Georgia's number. It's very possible. There's certainly some element of a mental handicap here. I mean, when you have two teams that play in the same conference, when you have the familiarity between the coaching staffs and you just played each other like 2 games ago, there's certainly a lot you have to take from that game. And, you kind of just listen to some of the things being said this week, and a lot of it's coach speak about not changing and it being all about execution. And I think it's actually, pretty true, right? There's no doubt there's some adjustments that are going to be made and there's going to be a wrinkle here or there thrown in, but this does come down to execution. I think that's pretty plain and simple. And you have this mental block or hurdle that Georgia's got to get over, and Stetson Bennett didn't sound overly confident when asked about it immediately in the postgame on the field after beating Michigan. But Kirby Smart came out and also said he just wants his guys to play like free, right? And we didn't really see that in the SEC title game. So that'll be an interesting element here that I think we'll probably notice pretty quickly. But certainly there has been quite the adjustment from the game a couple weeks ago to what opened this past week. And so, you do have some questions despite how that game unfolded, that there is a 5 or 6 point adjustment in just one data point. So that makes this a little bit interesting from that perspective.
When you look at the way that first game gone, and you talked about it, I mean, Georgia looked a little bit tighter in that spot. It's hard to ignore what Stetson Bennett was able to do on non-traditional passing downs. First downs, I mean, he was outstanding. He did throw 1 pick, but much more effective there than on known passing situations where he allowed the Alabama defense to pin their ears back and Will Anderson to be the disruptive force. If you're Georgia and you're trying to devise a game plan to attack this Alabama defense the second time around, we know Alabama is not going to be anywhere close to the same level of health they had in the first time. Josh Jobe out, had foot surgery, missed, of course, the semifinal game as well. And when you watch Alabama play against Cincinnati, they didn't have to worry about the Bearcats' vertical passing game, but Jalen Armour-Davis, I mean, was in and out of that game dealing with a back injury. No reason for me to believe that part of Alabama's defense is going to be any healthier in this spot either.
I think that's the interesting part in this game, because everyone, I think, focuses on Stetson Bennett a lot, and with good reason, right? He's the quarterback, and is it going to be JT Daniels at some point? Is he going to see some snaps? Is the leash going to be short? We had kind of heard that the leash would be short against Michigan, but Stetson Bennett came out on absolute fire, and we kind of hit that game perfectly as well, even though we didn't give it out. It's like, I think they're going to come out throwing a little bit here with play action because Michigan's a little slow defensively and they don't have any linebackers. And so Stetson Bennett was able to build some confidence there. Now, obviously, Stetson Bennett, the last 2 matchups against Alabama, not good, right? And I think Stetson Bennett is certainly a focal point in this matchup, and I'll get there eventually, but I think Stetson Bennett needs help, right? Like, where were the maulers up front for Georgia creating space in the SEC title game? And you look at Georgia's O-line and the way they recruit that position, it's the best position they recruit on the offensive side of the ball. And on the season, 11th in line yards, 18th in opportunity rate. Only 11% of runs were stuffed this season. And so Georgia's got to be able to run here. And they did it decently in certain situations in the first go-around. But if you look, Georgia's running backs only saw 1.9 yards before first contact against Bama in the SEC title game. In every other SEC game this season, Georgia's O-line allowed running backs to gain 3.1 yards before first contact. So it wasn't just Stetson Bennett, right? The O-line struggled creating space in the run game. 1/3 of Georgia's runs were stuffed by Bama. Georgia's running backs weren't really much of a help. They broke 1 tackle all game, combined. 1 tackle. The interior Georgia's offensive line has to step up here, and the backs need to be better. So it's not just, right, like Stetson Bennett. And I know Georgia did build that double-digit lead early against Bama and still lost, but I think from a confidence standpoint, it's still vital to start fast on Monday night. And I mentioned something about that as well last week against Michigan, that the team that got out to a lead would likely continue building on that lead, and that was the case. Georgia got out, and then they piled on. The Dogs were a net positive 48% in success rate in the opening quarter, so they did. They got out early. Stetson Bennett was able to play comfortably without any added pressure. Now, the difference here is Alabama's defense has far more speed than Michigan, right? They're not a complete abortion defending play action like Michigan. And if you look at some of Stetson Bennett's success, he obviously had the 2 monster deep throws where he's getting hit simultaneously, right? They're like perfect throws. But Stetson Bennett had 11 attempts behind the line of scrimmage versus Michigan. He completed all of them. I don't know if that works against Bama. It probably won't. Michigan's inside backers are like really slow. And that was a position that we knew kind of got weeded out in the offseason when they started to change formationally what they were going to do defensively. There was just so many linebackers transferring out, and that was kind of a hole in that defense all season. But I would expect Saban to force Bennett to throw tougher passes. What is different about this rematch Monday night, and you hit this perfectly, is Alabama's top cover corner, Josh Jobe, is out. Their number 2 corner, Amor Davis, is dealing with a severe hip injury that hasn't allowed him to play effectively. Only had 15 snaps against Cincy. Marcus Banks, we know, transferred out midseason. So the corner position for Bama is thin. It's Kool-Aid McKinstry, who's an uber-talented freshman, but this is the biggest game of his life. And then you have Kyrie Jackson, who's not really your traditional Alabama corner. He's a 3-star JUCO kid. That's not typically who like Saban's going after, right? He's not like this 5-star guy who's a no-doubter for the NFL. I want to see what Todd Monken does, right? If he's going to let Stetson Bennett throw early, test the corners, or if it's more of this like tight end running back focused pass game. And that'll be interesting. But anytime that we're going to talk Georgia and Stetson Bennett, I think we emphasize that first down, which you did so well there, right? It's like 1st and 10 is the money down for Georgia because everyone does expect some level of run, right? You typically have to honor run against Georgia on first down, and so the play action pass is crucial there. Georgia has the very best early down passing EPA of any Power 5 team in the country. So that has to be their money down. That has to be their explosive down through the air. But, whether it's an improved run game or an effective pass game, Georgia needs to bypass third down as much as possible. And they need third down when they're in it to be manageable. And they've really done a good job this season in totality doing that, right? Georgia's faced less third and long than any team in the entire country. That has to continue. If not, things, to your point, do get shaky because Stetson Bennett finished this season with a higher uncatchable pass rate than success rate on third down when facing SEC defenses. So that is kind of the Achilles of Stetson Bennett in this Georgia offense, passing in known passing situations on third down. The other crucial factor here is Stetson Bennett under pressure, right? He's got to avoid the mistake. He's just got to figure out mentally that we're going to live to fight another day.
Tuck it and
because
run.
Even when they got down 14, right? You're at midfield, you get a score, you then apply some pressure back, but he throws the pick 6 to battle. So when he's under pressure, he's just got to be a better decision maker. But he has struggled under pressure, specifically natural pressure. He has handled the blitz pretty damn well. So Bama did a good job in that first matchup with Anderson, getting some natural pressure in that SEC title game. If you look on the season, Stetson Bennett's passer rating dips more than 70 points when he's pressured versus throwing from a clean pocket. His adjusted accuracy dwindles 27%. His turnover-worthy throw rate doubles under pressure as well. Other thing to think about here, and right, it's kind of why the naysayers dislike Stetson Bennett. It's his frame, right? We know he's like a walk-on, right? He's not a 5-star kid. He's 5'10". That means Alabama doesn't always need to get home, right? They did a really good job against Cincinnati in their fundamentals, and that, hey, if we don't get to Desmond Ridder, we're going to get our hands up, and they batted 5 balls against Desmond Ridder, who's 6'4". So you don't necessarily need to get completely home on Stetson Bennett, who's 5'10". You just get your hands up, and you're going to probably bat a few balls. So I think this side of the ball just comes down to Georgia being able to run better, play in a neutral state or with a lead so Stetson is comfortable in those play-action passes that Todd Monken dials up on early downs are more effective because we know play-action works, but when you're down 21, right? Like, no one's biting as much, right? We're going to drop our guys in coverage a little bit. Bennett also has to be better when pressured and not make the catastrophic mistake. But let me be candid here too, right? Like, none of that matters if Kirby Smart's defense, a defense that we talked about at points in this season being historic and all-time, are going to give up 24 points in a singular quarter.
Well, you mentioned that defense, and we know what they've done their entire season body of work, allowing 7.2 points per game. And if you back out the contest against Alabama, where the Crimson Tide saddled 41 on them, those numbers look significantly better. But Georgia, 0 sacks against Alabama in the title game, despite blitzing 20 times. They allowed more than 500 yards compared to their season-long average of 238. When you look at what their touchdown-interception ratio, 6 touchdowns to 14 picks against the rest of their schedule. Against Alabama, Bryce Young, 3 touchdowns and no interceptions. Young also ran one in and accounted for 40 yards rushing. And from a passing efficiency standpoint, Georgia's season body of work, they've held their opposition to less than 96, Alabama 162. I mean, Kirby felt Alabama's third down success in previous meetings were due more to bust and coverage than anything Alabama did great. How much different can Georgia scheme things up to try and slow down this Alabama offense, knowing that they really have to account for one primary weapon in Jamison Williams, and you don't have to worry as much about John Mechie underneath, assuming that Slade Bolden won't be capable of replicating that production?
It's a great question. And you know, kind of when I dug into this game, I went back and watched the SEC title game again for a second time, and you start to look at some of the metrics, and you start to think about how this can be different, and I just keep coming back to this side of the ball being pretty straightforward, right? It's like, can Bryce Young play Houdini again? Can Bill O'Brien dial up another great game plan? Because he did, right? For all the shit that we've given Bill O'Brien over the years, right? He went into the Saban rehab program, and I thought he was fantastic in the SEC title game. The question becomes is like, did he unload the clip in the first meeting and he doesn't have much in the reserve here? And really, O'Brien and Bryce Young is how Alabama flourished there. And Bama was the first offense this season to have a success rate greater than 50% in standard time against Georgia. They scored the most points. They gained the most yards. Bama had a 19% explosive play rate. To your point, there are a lot of busts in the coverage of Georgia down the field. But give Bill O'Brien credit, right? I mean, we've busted his balls, numerous times over the years with the Texans. But one thing he did was tons of pre-snap motion, which is something Alabama had kind of dwindled down a little bit, their usage rates of motion in SEC play. That shot through the roof. He also had a bunch of bunch formation sets for his receivers, which helps them get open a little bit more. Bama ran 34 offensive snaps with pre-snap motion. Those plays had a 53% success rate and averaged 6.8 yards per play, whether it was run or pass. Bama crushed the Dawgs defense with those bunch sets, which is why they got lost in coverage at times. Passes that came with bunch formations were far and away Alabama's most efficient passes. But what's interesting is Bama got zero from the run game, unless it was Bryce Young. There's a couple designed runs in there. There were a couple off-script runs that were great in terms of EPA per rush. Brian Robinson should be healthier this time than he was in the SEC title game. We know he was battling that hamstring, so I would expect a little bit better showing on the ground. But Robinson and Sanders were a combined negative 2.8 predictive points added per run. So, in totality for that game. So just nothing going on the ground. I think what's interesting here is, and we probably should mention this, something we have to look for here over the next couple of days, but we're talking about Brian Robinson's health improving, but there's also a situation going on the right side of the Bama O-line. You have Emil Ekor, who is probably butchering his name. He left the first quarter in the Cincinnati game, did not return. Right tackle Chris Owens was helped off the field with an ankle issue late in the fourth quarter against Cincy as well. So we're going to have to monitor Bama's O-line, and that's really been the question mark this season of their offense. They don't have the depth right now, it's crazy to say, to replace those two starters. Plus, there was a really trusted source that I have that told me Georgia's big man up front, Jordan Davis, played in the SEC title game with the Big C and was like a shell of himself. So I would expect him to play a little bit better this go-around. I am interested to see what adjustments Kirby Smart's going to make, right? I mean, Bill O'Brien doesn't have a month to come up with wrinkles this time, right? He doesn't have a month to make the perfect game plan and catch Kirby's defense off guard. And my gut says Kirby lets his linebackers play a little bit more free here. We could see some tighter coverages and some more blitzes. It felt like Georgia played a little scared at times, sat back in coverage and only rushed 4 after they got beat deep a couple times. When they did blitz, they got home far more. Now, I know the sacks didn't really show itself, but Bryce Young was pressured on 38% of his dropbacks. The problem for Georgia was, 0% of those pressures turned into sacks. Bryce Young was just next level navigating the pocket, and when pressured did get home, he kind of was willing to fight another day. But it's clear pressure did get to him and changed him, because Bryce Young was 4 for 11 with a 36% raw accuracy when Georgia did get pressure. But I think this is on Kirby to find different ways to apply some pressure, right? Georgia loves stunts and games and slants. Alabama knew it was coming, right? Saban knows Kirby well. So Bama's O-line had a month to prepare for exactly those types of blitzes. Kirby's got to change that up a little bit. We know Georgia's weakness is their secondary. My gut says they play a little bit better this go-out, right? It certainly helps that Alabama is going to be without John Mechie. Third down is also key here. Georgia's 32nd in the country in third down conversion rate allowed against FBS opponents. Alabama, on the other hand, number 1 offensively. So the drive isn't over just because you've got Bama in 3rd and 7 and you have this vaunted front 7 that can get pressure, right? You have to get Bama off the field, because if you don't, Bama then picks up that first down, they kick in the tempo, and they don't let you get the packages you want. They don't let you rotate some of your guys along the D-line. So Kirby has to get pressure in these third and medium and long situations, be assignment sound. But to me, it's really straightforward. We're going to figure out if Bill O'Brien has enough left in the tank, because, all the bunch stuff, all the motion stuff, you had a month to prepare. Saban knew exactly what Kirby wanted to do with some of his blitzes. I think that changes a little bit here. Bryce Young's just going to have another game of his life, which is possible. But, he was absolutely ridiculous in that first go-round, and I'm not sure you can replicate it at that level again here.
Go back if you're Georgia, you're trying to devise a defensive game plan, figure out what LSU was able to do so effectively against Bryce Young and company. Try and rinse and repeat that game plan. Obviously an oversimplification, but just make sure you don't get caught up in the Bill O'Brien job interview. This could be the last time around for him calling plays for the Alabama offense if he takes the head coaching job at Michigan, should it become available.
Oof. Yeah, maybe. Now let's kind of wrap this up here before we get to the NFL. I think this is kind of important, right? Like, past the handicap of this game, all of the matchups and whatever information you're gathering with some of the injuries, right? Okay, like, fundamentally speaking, let's call this kind of betting X's and O's. If you're betting Alabama in this game, it needs to be with the points. If you're betting Georgia, the far better value option is the money line. And we see this all the time in the very biggest games where extreme volume is going to happen and the public is going to be out in full force. And in games like this, the public has their say. And they just, have this mindset of betting a little to win more. That's apparently appealing, right? And so we've kind of joked around twice now that Saban, Alabama, and if I can bet my 100, I can win 125 on the money line. Why would I ever take the 3? That forces me to bet 110 to win 100. Right, that's kind of the recreational better thought process most times. And because of that, it distorts the money line in these big games. And so if you're looking at a college football game that's sitting at 3 flat, the favorite should be roughly minus 160 on the money line. If you're looking at the dog 3 flat, it should be a shade higher than plus 130. But in this case, right, you can get Georgia, who's a 3-point favorite, if you shop around as low as minus 135 on the money line, right? You're saving about 25 cents on the dollar. If you're betting Alabama on the money line and not the spread, you're losing about 8 to 10 cents on the dollar.
No, it's a great point, and one that we'll talk about not only here in the national championship, but throughout the course of the NFL playoffs leading up to the Super Bowl as well, where oftentimes for books, they find themselves rooting for the favorite to cover or the favorite to win outright rather than cover, because you get such a distorted portfolio from recreational bettors where they'll lay the points with the favorite, they'll back the underdog on the money line, and in a game like this, if Georgia were to win by 1 or 2, it would allow them to take home a huge percentage of recreational dollars that we're betting. I'm curious to get John's take on this and the betting patterns he's seen when we chat with him a little bit later in the show. From the college game, though, Payne, to the NFL. And we only have a trio of games worth breaking down that are relatively known commodities. And, of course, I use that term loosely as things seem to change by the hour, on the hour in the NFL in 2022. So we'll go out to the NFC West, which will take center stage And we can start with Seattle at Arizona, where the Cardinals are a 6.5-point favorite. Total of the game sits at 48 at FanDuel Sportsbook. Arizona, of course, snaps a 3-game losing streak last week with the outright win against the Dallas Cowboys. They're 8-1 on the road this year, but just 3-4 at home. And the numbers are staggering in terms of points per game differential, points per game allowed, and a turnover margin that's plus 18 on the road compared to minus 7 at home. The only time they've beaten an opponent in their own building by more than a touchdown was the Houston Texans way back when. Meanwhile, on the other side, this is a Seattle team who's played significantly better over the last couple weeks as they've started to establish a ground game behind Rashad Penny. You're seeing Russell Wilson look to be more comfortable in the pocket. More importantly, they got DK Metcalf involved with 3 touchdown catches. And when you look at some of the numbers for Arizona, I mean, this season is indicative of how they've been in the grand scheme of things. Between Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury, just 4-10 against the spread, 6-8 straight up as a home favorite, much more conducive to betting them in the road underdog role. I throw all of that out there to ask you straightforward, are odds makers forcing you to pay a premium to back Arizona in this de facto must-win situation? Even though a win, they're going to need some help to be crowned division champions.
I believe so, right? And what was the look at? 4.5, 4, some places. There's this like mindset that the Cardinals got back on track after beating Dallas. And, it's like, right? If you look at the scoreboard in the traditional box score, you'll see Arizona hung 399 yards of offense and 25 points. And you'll be like, ooh, right? They're back. They beat the Cowboys in their building. But if you look at the advanced box score, you'll see the Cardinals offense had a 39% success rate, 40% through the air, 38% on the ground. It was horrific down-to-down efficiency. But Arizona managed to live on some of the explosives, and they were very good and smart in the mindset and ideas of attacking the attacker, and we know Dallas likes to play very aggressive defensively, and so they ended up with 9 explosive plays, and that's kind of what changed the perception of how they were able to operate offensively. There's also this weird dichotomy, which you just mentioned, where we've seen all season the Cardinals play significantly better on the road than at home. And some of the numbers back that up, right? 19 passing touchdowns as an offense on the road, 4 at home. Explosive pass rate up 4% on the highway. Passer rating up 30 points. Passing success rate at home is down 7%. So I think we're all trying to figure out the why. We know it's happening. We incorporate it into our numbers a little bit. I always like knowing when I incorporate something or make an adjustment, the reason why I'm doing it, but we don't know, right? Because Arizona at one point prior to Cliff was fantastic at home and dog shit on the road. And now it's been the polar opposite. But, suddenly we just go out and beat Dallas. And we discussed this, I think, Monday, Todd. I kind of just left that game saying, felt more like Dallas didn't show up than Arizona looking like world beaters and getting back on track. And then we go in and dig into the advanced box score and see the offense struggle down to down. And yet the market has made this 2-point plus adjustment from 4.5 on the look ahead to about 6.8, which is where I see it right now as we record. There's even some 7 in the market. But again, the reason I haven't attacked this yet, in addition to some issues we will mention when we get into Seattle's offense, there's 4 key cogs and starters for Seattle's defense that popped on the injury list and didn't practice on Wednesday. We'll know more obviously today, but it's your lead corner, John Reed, right? It's Bobby Wagner, the heart and soul of the defense. It's Dunlap dealing with an ankle injury and Diggs battling a knee issue. So for me, there is this kind of wait and monitor some of this situation in this game for me, Todd.
Yeah, it's definitely obviously something that becomes fluid. You're trying to figure out exactly who Seattle have out there. And there's no doubt in what's been a disappointing season by organizational standards and Pete Carroll potentially putting together his worst win-loss record in his illustrious NFL career. They'd love to play spoiler. For that to be successful, you obviously want to have a defense that you can lean on, knowing this is a group that spent more time on the field and is in the bottom of the league in total yards per game, passing yards per game, and first downs per game as well. And they weren't markedly better, even with a dominant scoreline against the Detroit Lions last weekend. But what has been better for Seattle, Payne, and I know it's come against some questionable competition, has been an offense that appears to have an identity again, and not just Russell Wilson. He got Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf involved, but Rashad Penny has been a breath of fresh air, a pick that we ridiculed at the time they made it and hadn't paid dividends at all, still really hasn't, but he's at least shown some burst. Third game in his last 4, he finished with more than 130 yards rushing and a touchdown. Last week against the Lions, 25 carries, 170 on the ground and 2 touchdowns, averaged 7+ yards per carry over his last 2 games. And ironically enough, he may be crowned fantasy football MVP for those folks that were able to plug him in during the postseason, as he's led the league in rushing yards and touchdowns going back to week 14.
He's been dynamic, and there's no doubt he's winning people some weekly DFS stuff. He's winning people their season-long championships, and it's good to see him come around. And you mentioned this perfectly. It's like Seattle's offense is starting to get on track a little bit, right? Shane Waldron's been praised the last few weeks for some of the tweaks he's made, and year 4 for Rashad Penny finally came on, and he's shown some flashes, and the reason Seattle drafted him in round 1. And if you look since week 13, the Seahawks are number 1 in the NFL in EPA per rush. Only a 41% rushing success rate, but it means Seattle's hitting the explosive in their ground game. And I think, Penny does have a little bit more burst despite what he looks like than some of the other backs. And it's really been a pleasant surprise. And if you look at the Cardinals, more than 15% of runs against their defense have gained 10 or more yards. So you do have that explosiveness dichotomy where you could see Seattle here rip off a couple chunk runs. I think we've discussed the Cardinals defense downtrending since J.J. Watt went down with his injury, and it's a real thing, right? It went from a borderline top 5 defense in efficiency and EPA per play to a below average unit in both since his departure. Over this 5-game stretch, it also feels like Russell Wilson is starting to play a little bit better, right? The finger continues to get healthier, and if you look at Russell Wilson, he's 8th in EPA plus completion percentage allowed during this little 5-game run here that they've had offensively. Now, this all sounds great, and the line is extremely inflated because Arizona's back, baby, right? And they just beat America's team. And Seattle, what in the world are they playing for? The reality here is the Cardinals would be about a 1.5-point favorite on a neutral in a normal week. And if you factor in home field advantage, maybe you get to Arizona -3 here. The problem is, and why we can't give the Seahawks out as a best bet, is Seattle has 5 linemen on their Wednesday injury report with the designation of illness. And we have seen in recent weeks where illness trends towards the COVID designation, Todd. And so sometimes you kind of have to wait and let that play itself out here a little bit later in the week.
There is no doubt about that, and this won't be the only game impacted by some of that, as we saw the Pittsburgh Steelers putting a couple players on their COVID list as well, highlighted by Deontay Johnson and one of their offensive linemen, which means if you follow the trail of breadcrumbs in this day and age, Payne, 1 and 2 players typically becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, and we go on from there. So always something you want to factor in before locking in your wagers, especially if you're choosing to move early. This, however, won't be the only impactful game on the playoff race in the NFC West. There's one that has even bigger ramifications taking place at SoFi Stadium, where the 49ers will go on the road to take on the Rams. And it's the Rams, a modest 4.5-point home favorite. Total in this game, 44.5 at FanDuel Sportsbook. The 49ers can clinch a playoff berth one of 2 ways, with a win against the Rams or combined with a Saints loss. When we look at the 49ers, it's no surprise to anyone the team is 30-14 with Jimmy Garoppolo under center since Kyle Shanahan took over, just 8-28 with all other quarterbacks. Meanwhile, the Rams on the other side, they can finish as high as 2nd in the NFC playoff picture or drop to the 5 seed if things break the wrong way for them. They're coming into this game on a 5-game winning streak since losing 3 straight, tied with the Packers for the longest in the league. Interesting to note that Kyle Shanahan has had Sean McVay's number. The 49ers 5-0 versus the Rams since the start of 2019, and it's not where they've been double-digit favorites. 4 out of those 5 wins have come in the form of them being underdogs, including the most recent meeting where they won outright 31-10, catching 3.5. In that meeting, the Rams turned it over twice and generated just 278 yards of offense. Defense didn't take the ball away, but were able to keep the 49ers in check, relatively speaking. 335 yards, not indicative of surrendering 31 points. Matthew Stafford threw one of his pick sixes in those contests. But we talked about it a little bit in monitoring the injury report for the Seahawks defense, Payne. The 49ers may be in a world of hurt, not just trying to figure out who their starting quarterback will be for this game, but who they may or may not have available in that defensive backfield.
Yes. Let's kind of go down the path here of the 49ers offense, and then we can kind of address some of the issues in the secondary. You know, you sometimes get these inflated prices, right? Where, like, you know, the Rams are in the playoffs, but they're fighting for the division and a 2 seed. And, you know, we do have the 49ers in this need to win or have the Saints lose kind of mentality, and they're in. And it's just weird to see how sometimes the market gauges one of those things more than the other. It's a little bizarre to me. You mentioned that Shanahan and McVay, they've kind of been in a battle. Obviously, they both got their jobs. I believe it was in 2017, and we know they're great buddies, and they've spent time together in Washington. And what's clear to me is Shanahan's kind of owned McVay a little bit. San Francisco's won 5 straight. They've covered 4 of 5. It's really interesting to me, and it doesn't shock me that there's been one-way traffic this week from pro bettors on this game, because it opened as high as 6, got down to as low as 3.5, and we're now at like a market consensus of 4.5, and it's because it's going to be the Trey Lance show on Sunday. And my understanding is Jimmy G can't even grip a football right now. So let's see where this line heads. I think the sharpest guys are getting some of that intel as well, and that's why it's kind of leaked a little bit back the other way.
Did you watch speaking Jimmy, did you watch the video that circulated on social media yesterday of him at practice?
I did not.
It was pretty interesting because you could clearly tell that George Kittle knew all the reporters were watching, and Kittle, more or less standing stationary, says, "Man, that's a hell of a ball that Jimmy threw." And there's a little bit of a hitch in his giddy up. I'll have to forward you the footage, and I know this doesn't make for compelling podcast content, but it was interesting to see. And then Jimmy, when asked about the thumb injury, they had a bleep out, pretty much says it hurts like shit, and says that every time he grips the football, it feels like the webbing in his fingers are tearing. Probably not what you want to hear from a quarterback about 72 hours away from the biggest game of the season.
No. Listen, I think our listeners loved us talking about practice field grass last week from some video footage we found, so this is certainly fair game.
Hey, I mean, Sports Emmy. I mean, if they could offer Emmys for podcasts, I mean, how we haven't been nominated already is beyond me.
Shucks.
I know you're awards. I know you're an awards guy. I know that's exactly why you're in this business.
Yeah, we'll just give the famous Kanye speech there. I think you know, there will be some movement here once Jimmy is officially announced out. It won't be anything drastic, but he has had some real success against the Rams. So to me, there is still like a slight downgrade. I mean, the 49ers are 5-0 against the spread with Jimmy. Right, he's completed like 68% of his passes for 8.1 yards per pass and 8 touchdowns against the Rams defense. So, I mean, he's shown well here. Now, I think Trey Lance comes with a little bit more variance in my mind, and I think last week was probably the perfect depiction. If you watched the first half against the Texans, you're like, Jesus, this guy stinks. And then if you watch the second half, you're like, ooh, right, this guy's got potential. I understand it. Trey Lance had a 36% passing success rate in the first half as a team. San Francisco, 43% success and 5.5 yards per play against a below-average defense. But in the second half, Trey Lance was the 5th best quarterback last week in EPA per play. So he's got some confidence coming off that game. There's things that you can work with and build on. Now, I think, is, you know, kind of the time where you will see some, erratic throws, right? I think that's probably the nice way to put this, right? They're working on his mechanics and his throwing motions. And so it's sometimes like you'll see ducks come out because it feels like his body and his brain are kind of in between the throwing motions. And so, you just kind of hope that there isn't a catastrophic event where he turns it over in one of those moments. But I think there is a situation where it's win and you're in the playoffs for San Fran, which means higher leverage game, which means expect more run from the quarterback here, which is an element Jimmy G does not bring you. Part of the reason I think Shanahan has had success against the Rams defense is their outside zone run game gives them some trouble. And if you look this season, even though the Rams defense has been really good of late, trending very good, their style with how they align their ends and linebackers, outside zone can give them trouble. And so whether it's over the right tackle or the right outside hash, the Rams have allowed over a 52% rushing success rate on some of those outside zone runs. So it's important to kind of think about that a little bit. But I think it's really big in this game for Trey Lance and the 49ers to come out strong, Todd. Build some confidence, take advantage of a slow-starting Rams offense, and I think you might have some success throughout the game here.
It is interesting because obviously on the Wednesday injury report, Trent Williams and Elijah Mitchell were DNPs, but Kyle Shanahan, whether it's smokescreen or not, seemed to indicate he was extremely optimistic about both those two players being available. So something to clearly monitor, no doubt about it, is the 49ers, if they're going to be without Jimmy Garoppolo, to your point, are going to have to lean on that ground game, and it'll be all hands on deck. I don't think they have a scenario where Deebo Samuel is going to carry the ball 22 to 25 times, despite him having a chance to break a record for rushing touchdowns coming from the wide receiver position. On the other side of the ball, Payne, we've talked about it, and it's been well chronicled. You brought up the numbers about where Matthew Stafford is ranked in recent weeks. 5 interceptions thrown over his last 2 games, but the 49ers secondary is far from a brick wall at this point. I mean, if you look at some of the injury reports, Josh Norman appears to be the healthiest corner that they have available. Emmanuel Mosley's practice window opened up, but they're not quite sure if he's going to be able to return on Sunday from that high ankle sprain. If that's the case, I mean, and the 49ers are down key cogs in their defensive backfield, do they have a snowball's chance in hell of slowing down this Rams offense?
Going to be difficult, and that's why I think it's really important for the 49ers offense to start strong, build that lead, because if you actually look at what the Rams are doing recently, a lot of slow starts. If you look in the last 8 games, the Rams have only held a halftime lead twice. It was against Jacksonville in a likely sick at the time Kirk Cousins, okay? The Rams have been outscored by 22 points in the first half over this 8-game stretch. Matthew Stafford has been especially horrific early on in these games. And the recent early struggles kind of scream something with Matthew Stafford. They scream McVay not having the best script and game plan. But if you look over this 8-game stretch, among quarterbacks with at least 50 first-half snaps, Matthew Stafford's 36 out of 39 quarterbacks in EPA plus completion percentage above expectation. So it is vital for the 49ers to get out fast, because if you look at the same parameters for the second half the last 8 weeks, 50 snaps, Stafford's EPA 9th. And so he's whatever's happening at halftime, he's getting things figured out. McVay's adjusting and adapting. I don't know, but it is just really important for the 49ers to get out here. I think the other thing you mentioned is really interesting here, and I think the reason neither of us have gone on San Francisco at this point, even though there has been some real sharp money on that side, was we're kind of waiting now at this point to see if Jimmy G officially gets announced out, but there is this situation in the 49ers secondary where Jimmy Ward, Kwan Williams, Dante Johnson all put on the COVID list. So you have that cluster situation with one unit, a very important unit, obviously, in the year 2021 with how football's played. We have to see if those guys clear by game time. You mentioned Emmanuel Mosley, Dre Greenlaw as well. Both were removed from the IR list. They have that 21-day practice window before they can, potentially they can play this weekend, but there is this 21-day window. So do they play this week? We'll see. Emmanuel Mosley is the 49ers' best corner. So it's something we're monitoring. Obviously, Week 18 is so damn fluid, and you have to be willing to adapt. Other thing that we have seen offensively for the Rams is a heavier run rate recently. It would appear that Cam Akers gets into the fold a little bit here this week, but the 49ers are trending well defensively. They're second in schedule-adjusted defensive rush efficiency this season, third in EPA per rush allowed since Week 10. So if the 49ers can stop the ground game and make the Rams one-dimensional here, it will give them a chance, I think, on this side of the ball. But again, we just have to monitor the situation in the secondary for the 49ers. We know the new rule has been instituted with the 5 days. The initial trio of guys I mentioned went on, I believe, tested positive a little earlier in the week. So there is a chance they can play. And then, again, let's monitor the Mosley situation.
Yeah, I was going to say those guys, I mean, you never obviously want to test positive, but I believe those guys were on the reserve list on Monday. So given the new protocols, it would give them, you'd hope, an opportunity to clear. You mentioned Cam Akers and the Rams, and I asked this question. I've never hesitated to ask dumb questions around here. I mean, Sean McVay, why rush Akers out there? I know it's a must-win of sorts, but do you figure it's a 5 carry just to get, some touches? I'd almost feel that getting Cam Akers at the expense of taking away a potential lather, given how good Sony Michel has been in a game like this, can almost do you a disservice offensively.
Yeah, Sony Michel's been fantastic for them. Kind of the forgotten man in New England. That ended up being a great trade for them, especially with Henderson having some injury issues along the way. I think for Cam Akers, you're rewarding him for the hard work. He's not getting a full load here, right? They want him to get up to game speed a little bit, hand it off a couple times, potentially when the game's done and over with, just to get him acclimated back to football speed so he can be a contributing factor come playoff time.
Yeah, shout out to the medical staff, by the way, for the Rams and Cam Akers' work ethic. I mean, to tear an Achilles in July and come back and play at this kind of level within 6 months is incredible for an injury that normally sidelined guys in the past for 9 to 12 months at minimum. Makes you wonder what's going on in the medical community to get these guys back on the field and the commitment they have to show off the field just to get back out there and play. No doubt a valuable part of the Rams offense last year during the playoffs, and one that they'll relish having back in the fold when they play their first postseason game next week. But the Rams aren't the only team in Los Angeles that has a chance to vie for a playoff spot. We, of course, have the Chargers and Raiders on deck. But before we get to that football game, let's welcome in our weekly guest. He joins us every Thursday here on the Bet the Board podcast. You, of course, can follow John Sheeran on Twitter. That's J Sheeran, SHEERAN 1981. And John, the end of a long regular season grind is closer than we ever anticipate. Is it always a little bit bittersweet when you get to the tail end of the NFL season, or do you look forward to a potential respite once they hand out that Lombardi trophy in a few weeks?
A little bit of both, I think, Todd. I think, come this time of year, everyone's pretty whacked from a long season. But, I think everybody's so, invested and at a really deep level in football that we'll all miss it a week after it's gone for sure. So this is one of the trickier weeks, as you allude to, trying to manage all of the noise and potentially trying to stay on top of news that really won't break until it just breaks. And there's a lot of energy expended in that space, maybe needlessly so, because it's just so difficult to guess as to what's going to happen. And so this week is tricky, but looking forward to the postseason.
It's always refreshing to hear that, John, because I think Payne wanted to shut things down on the NFL in about week 11 or maybe right around Thanksgiving. Payne, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what time frame were you looking to really close things down?
It was I don't know, maybe week 17-ish, and that probably would have been good, right? Going to the window with the Vikings last week was not overly pleasant, but fortunately we haven't been bit by the COVID bug too much this season.
Yeah, suboptimal there, but like you said, everyone dealing with it both from the bookmaking side of things and obviously on our side of the counter now. But, John, before we get into some of the marquee games for the NFL, we did preview the upcoming national championship between Georgia and Alabama earlier in the show. So wanted to know what you guys saw initially in terms of opening that number. A lot of books have said they saw support for the Georgia Bulldogs at prices of 1.5 or 2. Suffice to say, you guys have seen a similar pattern at FanDuel and anticipate the public coming in on Alabama as we get closer to kickoff?
Yeah, really interesting game in my view. I get entirely why the number is where it is. Georgia obviously super impressive the last day. This is all based off priors from the closing line from the Alabama-Georgia first game. And for me, I understand core ratings, and obviously we do a lot of that for the NFL. We do a lot of it for college, but I think the nuanced schedule that Georgia had, maybe even Alabama, I think you just learn more from the matchup itself rather than relying on what numbers closed in a previous matchup and adjusting for the Alabama win. I think there's a strong argument that Alabama should be favoured in my view. I understand why they're not, but I think they represent a bit of value. That's my own personal view. I think our key college oddsmaker disagrees and thinks that the line may flatter Georgia, but it wouldn't be the first time we've had a disagreement. I like Alabama. I think the matchup, the coaching advantage, I think they're able to beat you in two ways, and I think Georgia are struggling. Bennett obviously had a good game the last day, but I'm not sure he can repeat it against Alabama. So for me, that's a pretty strong play on Alabama. In terms of the money that we've seen, yeah, we sat at about 1.5 before the two semifinals, and obviously adjusted it to 3 now. It's an avalanche of money for Alabama on the money line, as you can imagine. I think about 17, 18 to 1 in favor of Alabama. The spread is more evenly balanced. It is favoring Alabama as well. And I did actually take a look this morning at the sharper customers that we have. So everyone that's effectively stake factored at 0.5 or lower, and they are all on Georgia, which is pretty interesting. So I think the sharper community definitely favoring Georgia, probably off the adjustment from the first game, which I question. But the public for sure all on Alabama.
Any rooting interest for you guys as far as the future market, or knowing that Georgia and Alabama kind of came in as relative short shots before the season, that you guys are in a pretty good spot?
Yeah, exactly as you say. The future book is pretty favorable. They're both winners. Given the public money on the game itself, we'll want Georgia as a pretty big swing. It'll be at least a couple of $1 million swing between the two of them. Georgia, pretty good result in the outright, and Alabama a small winner. But like I said, by the time all the money comes in on Alabama before kickoff, I think we'll probably strongly want Georgia for the book, not for the John Sheeran wallet though.
Payne, now that I've asked John all the questions about college and your skin's done crawling since we've allowed college football to infiltrate the NFL podcast, I'll turn things over to you.
No, this was a smart move, especially when you're looking at an Week 18 board that certainly has a lot of question marks. I guess you kind of hinted at the top, John, about navigating the board a little bit this week from the bookmaker perspective. When you look at a game like Packers Lions, the look ahead was 11. Obviously, there's discussions of the Packers not playing their full squad for the full game. Probably Aaron Rodgers comes out, works up a lather. How do you guys manage first quarters, first halves? Is that more of a manual basis, knowing that you might have a first half the same number as the full game?
Yeah, really interesting. You hear me talk all about the time about going to every effort we can to hang a line so everybody can have an opportunity to bet on it. I talk all the time about the public not having any more information than we do. But in this scenario, this is probably the worst case scenario for us, where we get a mixed message. I think before the week started out, we wouldn't have expected any of the starters to play. And then LaFleur, I think quite rightly, said 3 weeks is too long of a break. We want the starters to play at least some part of the game. And now we're in a situation where we really don't know if they're going to play, and if they do, for how long. Our guess is somewhere around about most of the first half. And that's why we sit at -3.5. But certainly you're right, there will need to be an adjustment for the first half versus the overall, because I think we all expect to see Jordan Love and the backups in the second half. So right now we don't actually have all of those markets that I promise everybody up. We're really sticking to just the core lines right now. We haven't even finalized where our number sits given the uncertainty around it. So we're kind of just in no man's land right now. But I think the public are in the same place, and we haven't seen any real interest in the game right now, which I think makes sense.
Adapting and being fluid is key in most markets. Anything else that's kind of catching your attention this week in terms of potential sharp action that's come into this point?
Not really. I mean, we haven't really seen any of the pro money syndicate activity yet this week, and they're probably struggling with the same issues that the rest of us are. I think the two that stood out to us were probably San Francisco. We only made that line a touch over a field goal. It opened 5.5, has kind of swung down to 4.5. We'll still lean San Francisco, obviously, at 4.5, given our numbers almost just over a full point lower. On that game, obviously a good record. It looks like a pretty tough matchup, but obviously Trey Lance comes into it, and we think that the market has probably overreacted for that downgrade. Not a real whole lot else, to be honest. It's really just, as you said, a kind of a tricky board. Indianapolis is a little high, 15.5, up from 14.5. We were a flat 14 in that game, so that one's probably gone a little bit too much. It'd be interesting to see how that goes between now and kickoff. Probably not enough for us to take away a position on it. We'll probably just stay neutral on the game, unless it was to get 1.5 higher, I think. Vikings -4, it's 3 to 3.5. So that one, slight move yesterday, kind of agreed with where we were as well, but not a whole lot else, to be honest.
Strong sentiments from Dalvin Cook saying he's playing for his coach. Kirk Cousins returning as well. So we did see that move from 2.5, now out to as high as 4.5 some other places. In terms of potential liabilities for the books this week, anything glaring there?
I think a lot of I'm super excited to see the Chargers-Raiders, provided we get the expected win from the Colts. I think that game on Sunday night in Las Vegas, tickets are expensive already. I'm sure Todd has already looked at it, but that promises to be
John, I'm front row and center in the Win Club. I already bought a table for all our BTB listeners. Payne fronted me, 6 figures. We'll be popping bottles, Cristal, so you'll see us on the telecast.
I'm just disappointed I didn't get the invite, Todd. But that game, I think,
didn't get the invite either, John. I just saw the charge come across the business account.
Well, I mean, John, we didn't get the invite to, Army and Air Force or Army and Navy either. So, I mean, turnabout's fair play in all of this. You're on one end of the country. I'm over here. Payne, we have to keep sequestered in Miami at this point. We can't have him making 2,000-mile sojourns this time of year. So I have to take full advantage of it. This is the luxury I'm afforded as treasurer.
I hear you. But I think that game is super interesting. Obviously, it'll make for a great spectacle. Pretty interested in the total. I think the total is one that we made a little bit higher than where it is. I know it's been bet up from 48.5 to about 49.5. We made it just over 50, and I think, with all the shenanigans around the other game, the Colts and the Jaguars, you might be getting a bit of suppression in the marketplace for the under in that game, and maybe that's a play on the over, and hopefully we get that Colts win. Tampa Bay will be a big decision for us, undoubtedly. We know that historically they've played their starters in these situations. They did the same last week, and even though they're a little banged up, I think Bruce Arians has already confirmed that he expects most of the starters to play there. So I think with that kind of anemic offense from Carolina, I think plenty of the public will be willing to lay the points in Tampa Bay.
Bruce was emphatic. The guys were playing this week. Going back to that Sunday night game, because it's one we discussed, and I know a lot of people will be watching. Let's just say there is this upset of Jacksonville beating the Colts. What kind of adjustments have you guys said in your mind that you would make either side or total?
I think the total and the fourth quarter total probably in particular is really interesting should that occur. I think, I expect the game to be played out properly in a scenario even where the Jags beat the Colts. But you would be only human. You wouldn't be human if it did impact you if the game was tight in the fourth quarter. We've seen it in other sports at the highest level. Italian soccer always comes to mind in this scenario where, you have two teams late in a game where they've heard a result from a different game impact them and a draw suits both of them, and you've seen how it impacts it. So I think they wouldn't be human if it was close in the fourth quarter and a tie served both of them well. So I think you might see, like I said, some suppression in the total in that scenario. But I'm not a believer. I think these teams are professional enough. I think it'd be a horrible spectacle if that's what happened. And I think I'd probably just double down on the over at that stage.
Makes complete sense. One other game I did want to ask you about, because it's somewhat interesting. We know Big Ben coming off the emotional Monday night win. Both of these teams have an outside shot at the playoffs with the Ravens and Steelers if things were to fall the right way. All signs point to Lamar Jackson being out for this one. Now, we thought he was going to be out last week, but as soon as he was announced out, the market reacted. What kind of line are you dealing at FanDuel right now? Is it a line that has the potential for some Lamar Jackson in it if he gets announced out? Where do you kind of envision going there?
We don't think he'll play, and we've had the right call on him for the last couple of weeks, and just don't see the scenario where he's on the field. So almost all of him not playing, and we expect Huntley to be on the field. Some small bits of rain forecast for Sunday afternoon. We were 5, a little bit under where it sits at 5.5 right now. So I wouldn't expect a whole lot of movement in our number in a scenario where Lamar was ruled out, because, like I said, we just don't expect him to be on the field.
Makes complete sense. Todd, anything on your end?
No, I mean, those are the main things. You guys covered a ton of ground talking about some of the marquee matchups. John, we know you're going to be glued to the game going on at MetLife Stadium, of course, between the Washington football team and the Giants, because any opportunity we have to watch Jake Fromm start an NFL game, clearly is must-see TV. But as far as, the weekend looks, suffice to say that Sunday nighter, all things breaking equal, will be the biggest handle that you guys will see on the final Sunday of the season.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like I've always said all season long, primetime games are where our handle really is generated. About half of it normally on any given week comes through the 3 primetime games. And yeah, this weekend with the kind of dead rubbers that we have across the board, a meaningful Chargers and Raiders game will definitely be the highest volume of the week by quite a long way, I would think.
Always great to cherish the final full slate that we get on the National Football League schedule. Of course, every game from here on out will be extremely meaningful with a full complement of 6 playoff games for Wild Card Weekend as we inch ever so close to handing out that Lombardi Trophy. John, can't thank you enough for your contributions throughout the course of the regular season. Best of luck for Week 18 and, of course, in the National Championship on Monday night. And hopefully you have a few friendly side wagers with your college football traders there, that there's a nice steak dinner, a bottle of wine, a couple of cigars on the line based on who wins between Alabama and Georgia.
That sounds like a good idea, so we'll have to get that one rolling.
Best of luck this weekend, my friend.
Thank you, guys.
You know, Payne, when you're in and around this business, as long as we are, no surprise that John kind of indicated that the general public is providing one-way money line bets in the national championship, and it further substantiates the point you made earlier. It's all Alabama, plus $1.25 more so than taking that field goal.
Yeah, and that's causing the distortion, and I'm sure it's only going to continue as we get closer to kickoff. It'll be interesting to see what potential adjustment is made there, but it's going to be this clear battle between pros and the public. And hearing that there is 17 times more tickets on the Alabama money line than Georgia, and we are not really at the juncture of the week where the public is fully immersed in betting this game. It's going to be interesting to see what that looks like come Monday afternoon.
Yeah, lopsided market to say the least. I will admit, I'm impressed. FanDuel has some prop markets up there and available, and want to remind all of our loyal listeners who heard our breakdown on the national title earlier, if you're not quite sure what side to bet on, well, FanDuel help push you one way or another, offering 30-1 enhanced odds for new user signups. FanDuel.com, use the code BETTHEBOARD to take advantage of that. We do have one football game left, though, to discuss, and it's the Sunday night affair before we get to Monday's national title. And under the bright lights out here in lovely Las Vegas, it'll be the Chargers and Raiders vying for that final playoff spot in the AFC. It's the Chargers, a full field goal road favorite. A total on this game sits at 49.5. And when you look at this Chargers team, they're here because they couldn't beat the Houston Texans as nearly a 2-touchdown favorite. Meanwhile, the Raiders in this spot, winners of 3 straight, as they kind of took their season off life support and were able to give themselves a puncher's chance. Chargers won the first matchup 28-14. They closed as a 3-point home favorite, a game where they built a 21-0 lead. The Raiders came racing back only to find themselves coming up a bit short. When you look at the Chargers this season, their games have averaged a league most 54.1 points per game. They've now gone over the total in 5 straight contests, and they've scored 28 or more points in 5 straight games, the longest stretch for them since 1982. On the other side, the Raiders will be seeking their second playoff appearance in 19 years. The 3-game win streak we mentioned came on the heels of losing 5 out of their last 6. Meanwhile, for as prolific as the Chargers have been offensively, the Raiders have been an underteam, going under the total in the 3-game winning streak. But Derek Carr in prime time has been surprisingly good, 11-4-1 against the number in that role. And Derek Carr, no stranger to leading game-winning drives or winning games outright as an underdog. A fascinating matchup, no doubt, between two franchises that go back to hatred stemming from their time in the AFL.
I have had this discussion with you off air, and I think we've maybe had it weeks ago publicly. And you think about all of the things that Derek Carr has had to deal with this year, from a head coach moving on, a play caller changing, your top weapon having a situation off the field that's caused some distractions, your offensive line is well below average, your best receiver is Hunter Renfrey, and now obviously Zay Jones is starting to pick things up and he's emerging a little bit. Darren Waller, your best weapon, has been out for over a month, and here you are winning your in situation. I mean, Derek Carr has held this thing together. Now, I think when you look at this, prior to the 3-game win streak, the Raiders were on a 1-5 run, and the win came in overtime. The last 3 games the Raiders have won are by a combined 9 points, and they've come against Nick Mullins on a game-winning field goal, Drew Lock at home, where you trailed at halftime, and a game-winning field goal against an Indy team that had 4 guys along the O-line that were either out or returning from an illness and a quarterback that had COVID and didn't practice all week. So I don't think the Raiders are very good. We have them power rated below an average team. But I think the surprise is we only have the Chargers slightly above an average team. And so there's absolutely zero question that this line is inflated. But I also think that there isn't a question that if you get these two teams playing at peak, the Chargers are far better. And so that becomes the interesting debate here is, hey, we made the Chargers minus 1.5. So you can see why, there was an appetite to lay minus 2.5 in terms of if you gauged both teams playing at peak, then it can make some sense, right? There's also some matchups that are interesting here. I think part of the early week move on taking the Raiders from when it went to 3 down to 2.5 was the idea that Darren Waller was going to play and be effective. And I think from all indications, he is going to play. But my vibe on Thursday morning, in terms of his effectiveness, is probably different than what my optimism was for that effectiveness earlier in the week. And so, let's see what he looks like at practice today. His first practice back was a limited on Wednesday. I think today is going to be pretty telling. Zay Jones, as I mentioned, is emerging. Certainly nice to get some help for Carr aside from Hunter Renfrow. But when you look at this matchup, this has to be a game, I think, where Josh Jacobs get going on the ground. He's got to have success. We know the Chargers dead last in schedule-adjusted defensive rush efficiency. But the one thing here that's interesting is since Week 13, the Chargers are starting to get a little bit healthier on that side of the ball. A couple guys along the defensive line are back. A couple guys in the secondary are back. They're 13th in EPA allowed per rush over the stretch since Week 13. So maybe this does become a little bit more of a Derek Carr game. I know the offense struggled mightily the first time against Brandon Staley. Was not a good effort. I believe it was 3.9 yards per play in that game back in Week 4. So Staley's defense gave them a little bit of trouble, right? They were able to get home with some pressure. They were able to confuse the Raiders a little bit. That was more of a downfield pass attack Raiders offense. So maybe now their new vibe with Hunter Henry and throwing a little bit shorter now than they did back in Week 4 can help some things. But ultimately, this is a Raiders offense that has scored more than 20 points very few times over the last half of the season or so. I don't know how many they're scoring here. I think this is going to be a little bit more of a difficult matchup when you look at the Chargers defense than what would present itself on paper and metrically in my mind.
There's no doubt the way to beat the Chargers has been with an aggressive and physically imposing ground game, and the Raiders' offensive line has not exactly been a position of strength for this group all season and trending in the wrong direction. And when you look at that defensive backfield, too, for the Chargers, to your point, they've been a lot better than they get credit for, especially with a healthy Asante Samuel Jr. out there, along with Davis opposite him at the cornerback spot. The Raiders are going to be competitive in this spot, Payne. Their defense is going to have to play lights out. And when you look at the Raiders' defense this season, over the last 3 weeks, they've been great, allowing 15.7 points per game compared to 27.7 season-long average. Opponent yards per game have dropped from 357 to 219, obviously contributing to going under the total. Carson Wentz was held in check. We know Wentz dealt with a week of no practice and COVID protocols and everything else. Max Crosby leads the league in pressures with 82, and they're going to have to get after Justin Herbert because we know the Chargers have playmakers in spades, even if it appears that Keenan Allen isn't putting together the most productive season. Mike Williams bursting onto the scene, and we know how dynamic Austin Eckler can be, especially when it comes to finding the end zone.
As we record, the Minnesota-Chicago game off the board with
COVID.
Justin Fields testing positive for the Big C.
I thought the whole Bears quarterback room already had that, but, what do I know?
I don't know. I think we're all just guessing at this point. Anyways.
It's a very good point.
At its core, throw the ball if you're the Chargers, right? I mean, the Raiders are 25th in defensive pass efficiency. They're top 10 against the run. The Chargers, third in offensive pass efficiency, about average on the ground. I think you'd hope this is a game that's placed in Justin Herbert's hands. He's been the fourth best quarterback in early down adjusted EPA per play since their Week 8 bye, something we had discussed about how the early down offense had been much better. It's continued to be. Over that same stretch, the Raiders defense, 28th in dropback EPA allowed per pass on early down. So the formula seems pretty simple. There has been a ton of talk from Staley and the Chargers camp this week about getting Austin Eckler involved based on his success in the first meeting where it was like 15 carries for 117 yards. I believe he had 4 explosive runs, 87% rushing success rate in that game. But the Raiders' defense has trended substantially better against the run with Perriman back, and then they added Divine Deablo, the third-round pick out of Vatek, who's emerging, and they've really solidified some of the run issues defensively the Raiders had at the early stage of the season. The plan at the beginning of the week, I think when you look at one key injury to talk about with Corey Lindsley, was that they were going to take it easy. His back locked up on him last week. Staley mentioned that, maybe he'll practice this week, but we're gonna try to keep him as healthy as possible. And I think he's going to play, but let's monitor that situation because that would be a pretty big loss. Aside from that, the Chargers just have about everyone available. You mentioned Crosby. Obviously, he's been a menace. I believe he is 4th in pass rush win rate among defensive ends. But if you look across the board, like the totality of pressures and the pressure rates, they've dipped since the beginning sector of the season for the Raiders.
True.
And so if you can kind of shut down Max Crosby a little bit, and there are some tackles on this roster for the Chargers that can kind of minimize him a little bit, I think there's going to be some success here for Justin Herbert in this Chargers offense. And I think that is partly why, right, you're seeing this correlation to Chargers taking a little bit money at 2.5 as well as the total at over 48.5, now as high as 50 some places. That's kind of the correlation here, because the way the Raiders defense has improved run-wise and the way the offense is trending wouldn't certainly signal an over.
Yeah, if this thing turns into a track meet, it's not going to bode well for the Raiders. I don't think they're equipped to go up and down the field and turn this into a firefight. I mean, if it's going to take 27 to 30 points to win it, it's a game, no doubt, that much more in the Chargers' wheelhouse than it is for Vegas at this point in the season.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I know we didn't talk about them, but there are some games of meaning that we can just touch on quickly because we're kind of, you mentioned one of them, which was Steelers-Ravens. Short week, obviously emotional game for the Steelers. Big Ben's crying at the end. He's kissing babies and shaking hands. I think if you listen to a lot of the post-game pressers, it tells you it was this all-in effort, and you had Big Ben throw it 46 times on Monday, so a lot of usage there.
46 times for less than 130 yards passing. That is the model of efficiency.
Yep. At this stage, it's kind of very bizarre to see a line that had some element of Lamar Jackson in it. I thought initially when he would get announced out, this would move downwards, and ultimately you'd be in a situation where you could lay 4 with the Ravens. And all week I'm been hearing that's going to be the side. You mentioned, though, Deontay Johnson just got announced out. A key cog along the offensive line as well for the Steelers, and now we're back out to 6. So that was the sharp side. I don't know ultimately what's going to unfold in terms of all of the COVID situations here for the Steelers. But we were hoping and we were working on getting that game down to Baltimore -4, and now it's kind of out of our hands with that breaking news of the COVID situation for the Steelers. The other one that does have relevance, Todd, is Saints-Falcons. Saints need a win, and to have the 49ers lose. There was a well-respected group I speak with who was responsible for taking Atlanta +6. Since that time, though, question marks about Kyle Pitts' availability, and it looks like the Saints' offensive line could have some reinforcements back. I know Ryan Ramczyk returned to practice. That line is now down to like 4.5. I'm going to need more intel there at this point. I'm going to have to monitor some of those situations, but at least initially early in the week, it was some sharp one-way money on the Falcons.
Hey, it's one of those weeks where you're not going to know what the full picture looks like until 10 minutes before kickoff on some of these football games. And a game that has no meaning, but it's still been fun to watch the market not be able to make up its mind, is the Cowboys and Eagles. A game where you saw the Cowboys open as modest favorites, get to as much as 7.5, number coming back to 5.5. So odds makers chasing their tail. And this is a week where bettors with a little bit of intel can oftentimes get a slight edge, because information will provide even more value than some of the models and some of the tried and true X's and O's handicapping that you would utilize typically during the course of this season.
Yeah. Yeah, not a bad spot to be in, having laid, Cowboys -3 and taking back the Eagles +7.5. And so it'll be interesting to see what unfolds with who Dallas is going to play. Is it Gardner Minshew? He's certainly no slouch. We saw him go up and down the field in the one start he had earlier this season. So be interesting to see how that played out. I have no idea. Obviously, money, right? I have no idea why we're playing these games on Saturday. And, we've kind of mentioned this, I think, on Monday, that the Chiefs kind of got jobbed here because if they were to lose somehow, right, the Titans can then rest some guys. Typically, these games that have impact with each other are played at the same time on the same day. And so Chiefs were kind of done a disservice here for some unknown reason. Very bizarre. Obviously, money.
Yeah, you figure somewhere along the way, cooler heads would prevail. We know the money, like you said, is out there. That, in a Monday Night Football contract, ESPN and ABC get an extra game, but they'll have the wild card game. You'd like to think with the extension of the NFL regular season that maybe they could use the Saturday before the final Sunday of the NFL regular season to showcase the college football national championship rather than play it on a Monday. I know the schedule doesn't always break that way, and there's other wrinkles involved, but we'll see exactly what things look like going forward. Either way, probably not must-see TV between the Cowboys and Eagles. A perfect opportunity to sneak out of the house knowing the next couple of Saturdays we'll have big-time football there that bears watching.
Yeah, I'm waiting on you to give me another movie recommendation for
Here we go. I'm going to take shots. No, you're done. I mean, I may have the best movies to recommend that you'll never get to hear at this point because I've struck out.
Movies that no one will know ever existed.
I've struck out multiple times with some of my suggestions, so I know when I'm cooked.
No, you're typically pretty good.
Yeah, we've said this before, though. We have very different tastes. I know you like to go in there and to use exactly how you describe the Kurt Warner movie. You like to go in a movie, know you're getting an 87-mile-an-hour fastball right down the pike, just like on the jugs machine at the batting cage. You go in, you know what you're going to get, and you enjoy it. For me, I tend to fall into the trap of some of these cinephile movies that are a little darker, a little bit more, I don't know, not necessarily as mainstream. But yeah, there's no doubt that A Nightmare Alley was not for everyone. I'm not going to defend it in that way.
It'll sound repetitive, but one of the favorite movies of mine over the last handful of years that I went in completely cold on, expected nothing, and was a little bit darker was Spotlight. That might be one of my favorite movies of the last, I don't even know when it came out. Geez, we're getting old. Maybe 5 years ago that came out, roughly around that time.
I mean, they did a great job. They did a great job on it, that's for sure.
Yeah. And so this one, I knew what it was going in. Like, I watched the trailer. I knew it wasn't my vibe, and I was okay with that because I'm a big Bradley Cooper guy, and he was fantastic. In the end, had a great twist. It was just kind of like 2 hours of getting there and just a bunch of weirdness until you got there.
You apparently were not a fan of the show on HBO back in the day, Carnival, I assume.
I was not, no.
So yeah, the carny culture.
I was more of a Boardwalk Empire, Sopranos guy.
That's fair. I mean, anything mob related we know is more in the Payne and Cider wheelhouse. Although you were not a fan of Mary Saints of Newark, if that's correct, right?
Which one is that?
That was the prequel to The Sopranos.
The movie.
Yeah, the movie.
It wasn't good. I'm going to give it another shot, though, because I only got, I think, probably 70% of the way through it. I believe football season was just starting. And so, one night I was like, I'm going to get away mentally. And then it sent me to bed early.
That tells me all I need to know. If you're able to get through the prequel to one of your favorite TV shows of all time and you have to break it into parts that you can only watch 70% of it, is probably the reason that I haven't made the commitment to jump in. Because if it's in that particular family and that genre and it doesn't come with the Payne Insider stamp of approval, I can't allocate my time, especially during peak season, to watch it.
There we go. I see what you're attempting to do here. And
no, I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt.
You're stereotyping the Italian on the other end of this podcast.
Here we go. No, if I wanted to stereotype that, we could go into a bunch of other stereotypes instead.
Okay.
All right.
Hey, about time.
Hold on.
Wrap this thing up here.
You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You, of course, can follow me there as well. And the podcast, most importantly, at Bet the Board Pod for those folks scoring at home. As we get to the NFL playoffs, there will be no Monday show. So you need to tweet us, text us, let us know that Apple, iTunes, Spotify, whatever the hell you're listening on, has no podcast. It'll be Thursdays from here on out. Super Bowl week, we'll figure out what that's
provided your cell phone number to our listeners.
When did I provide my cell phone number?
I don't know. You said don't text us.
Oh, well, I mean, maybe I'll put yours out there. I mean, We'll see. If Antonio Brown can put his bank account information out there, we can put our cell phone out there for general consumption. But we do have one final order of business to figure out here. Do you see an investable opportunity for Week 18 in the National Football League?
I do not, and I don't want to piss away what we've made this season, both on this podcast for listeners and personally. I think we go to Monday night national championship game, Georgia, Alabama, and we go with the Georgia money line. I am going to be betting that personally. I know you already have. Candidly, I have no idea where this goes, right? I mean, if the tickets at this point are 17-1 on an Alabama money line, maybe this comes down a little bit. The sharp guys are having their say. Again, you can lay minus 135 on the money line. That is out there. I'm going to be on it. I don't know when I'm going to be on it. But let's have Georgia money line as a best bet. Let's cap it at like $1.55, we'll call it. But again, there's plenty of minus 135 out here. My intuition here is I'm going to kind of wait to see the best number I can get. But if I notice that it's starting to get a little out of hand, then I'm going to just bet it. And because I'm a sicko and kind of in front of the screen all day long, I have that ability. But we'll cap it, call it at minus 155. But again, plenty of minus 135 out there. So best bet, Georgia money line for the national championship game on Monday. If we do have a best bet in the NFL, we'll post it on the website, bettheboardpodcast.com. You will see this podcast right on the homepage. Atop of it, there will be an orange read more button. Click that, and we'll place the best bet in the body. Don't know if we're going to have one, but if we do, that's where it will be. So check back Sunday before 1 p.m. kickoffs.
Perfect. Saturday night, then, will you be seeing another movie instead of watching NFL football then? Is there one that you'd want to recommend in advance or try and get feedback from listeners to make suggestions?
What's the new one that is coming out this week? I'm going to fire up the text, the typing machine for those at home who get annoyed by hearing that in the microphone. But here we go. What was the new one that was out? It was a number. It was a number movie.
It's a great question. I have no idea, so that's why I defer to you.
You were the guy.
No.
What's the name of this thing here?
See what you got, and then we're closing up shop.
The 355. That's the new one.
What the hell is it about?
This week, CIA agent Mace Brown joins forces with a rival German agent, a cutting-edge computer specialist, and a Colombian psychologist when a top-secret weapon falls into the hands of a group of mercenaries. By the way, I feel like I could be Kramer there.
I was going to ask, do you want to be Kramer? Why don't you just tell me the name of the movie you'd like to see?
Yes, there you go. That's me.
So
that is me.
I mean,
that's going to be my next life after I retire.
Every now and again, maybe you should go out there and see how much it costs to get 444 Filk.
I feel really good there about being a college dropout, but being able to show our audience that I can actually read. So that was a positive there as well.
We know you can read. But no one has ever questioned your reading comprehension and your abilities on that front, or to break down the numbers it takes to be successful.
Are we getting out of here?
Yeah, we're getting out of here. I just,
okay.
You were filibustering over there, so I was trying to buy you time so you could launch your side hustle.
I didn't know the name of the movie, so I was able to figure that out. That actually looks pretty good. That's kind of my vibe. Are you going to go see this?
I may have to check it out, but Saturday night I may find myself at T-Mobile because it's the return of Marc-Andre Fleury for a little Golden Knights, Chicago Blackhawks action. So that's probably where I will be, barring a major change in my plans.
My guy Flower.
That's the whole thing. If you guys had in between the pipes, you guys might be Stanley Cup frontrunners. You never know. But
yeah, I think we definitely would have won another one.
There is a good chance. You may not have won the one you won with Matt Murray between the pipes, but there's a good chance you may have won another one or made a deep run last year with the level Flower was playing at when Tristan Jarry did not exactly hold up his end of the bargain in the NHL postseason. But we can go on and on around here. You guys have lives, busy days, and whatnot in front of you. We know Payne. We don't want to keep him longer than we need to. So follow Payne on Twitter, @PayneInsider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast @BetTheBoardPod. And come Monday night in the College Football National Championship with a Georgia moneyline ticket in hand, we'll see you at the window.